BC politics. What was once a boring political snooze fest, a sad squabble between woke lefty Twitter warriors, and the charisma vacuum that was the BC Liberals, has just been turned on its head forever. On October 19th, the Conservative Party of BC pulled off a comeback no one saw coming, electing their first MLA in nearly 50 years and racking up more seats than they've had in a century. The BCNDP, too busy preaching plastic bag guilt, were completely blindsided. David Eby got steamrolled, taking only 5 seats outside of his usual strongholds in Greater Vancouver and the island. When the dust settled, we have 40 seats for the NDP, 40 for the Conservatives, and 2 for the Greens. Now the NDP is leading in 6 of the 11 remaining seats. But David Eby, don't pop the kombucha just yet, because the battle is still on. There are 65,000 mail-in ballots left to be counted, and Main Street Research says the Conservatives might be sitting on a nice little stockpile. If those ballots break their way, it could flip a few ridings that are closer than Trudeau and Jugmeat on a Friday night. But whether they win or lose, the real question is, how cooked is David Eby? And if he does end up clinging to power, how fast will his government implode? Let's take a look. How do you think the BCNDP War Room feels about even a minority victory?
Unmitigated disaster for them, no doubt. I mean, look, they clearly underestimated the momentum that the Conservatives had. I've been through a lot of campaigns where, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal, incumbents have, challenges that they have to fend off. They had a terrible, terrible record. So they did everything in their power to avoid that record. The entire campaign was about attack.
When you hear from John Rustad, conspiracy theories, division, cuts, it's not going to solve the problems that we face.
Fear-mongering about the BC Conservatives, fear-mongering about Rustad and his candidates.
And if you're informed by conspiracy theories from the internet, if your candidates think that vaccines cause AIDS, that makes us all less safe when the emergency happens.
The level of gotcha and, the employment of opposition research was unparalleled in terms of my experience of 30 years of campaigning. And it was because, again, they couldn't defend a record that was so poor, particularly on the things that were driving people to the polls. So I think that from an NDP War Room perspective, they miscalculated. They thought that would stick a lot more. And what happened was that people didn't care. And so if I'm the NDP War Room, I'm very upset of the fact that nothing stuck for them. And more importantly, I'm upset with Eby's performance because you could see it on election night. He was dejected.
We need to support people with the costs of daily life. We need to make life more affordable for British Columbians. And we need to make communities safe for everybody.
For a victory speech. And again, no one has claimed victory yet, but it was, I've seen some concession speeches that were far more upbeat than that. So yeah, NDP War Room is not happy right now, and the party in general should not be happy right now.
Yeah, and because they can't run on their record, one of their tactics this election was to backpedal and basically capitulate on some key issues, the carbon tax being one of them. But now that's put them into a tough situation where if they do have to form a coalition government with the Greens, that they might have to flip-flop back on that.
The problem for the NDP is that, like you mentioned, they capitulated on some key issues because they had to. These are issues that the Greens prioritized, the Greens highlighted in their campaign, and they're going to squeeze them on it, But the problem for the Greens is that they have 2 rookie MLAs that were just elected. They lost their leader, Sonia Furstenau. And so negotiations, I don't know if she's going to be involved. That'll be very interesting. And these rookie MPs are going to have, they're going to have to be very careful because the NDP is going to, for example, Andrew Weaver, who's the previous leader, who was the one who signed the agreement in 2017 when the exact similar situation occurred when the Greens held the balance of power. He has advised the Greens to say, look, You guys are two rookies. Get your feet. Don't sign any agreement now. You don't have to. There's no immediacy right now. And quite frankly, budget's going to come in the spring. There's not going to be a lot that happens legislatively or otherwise in the next 6 months. So he said, don't sign anything. Get your feet wet. Get a sense of where things are, how things are going to shake out, and then make your decision on where you're going to go. So for the NDP, they're going to get squeezed by the Greens at some point, whether it's now an agreement is signed or whether it's later. Those capitulations are not going to be acceptable for the Green Party in whatever kind of support agreement that they come up with. And the Conservatives are going to hammer them. You know, Rustad has come out and said directly every chance and every opportunity he can to bring down this government. And if he doesn't have, you know, if the Greens are going to side with the NDP on votes, then he's not going to have every opportunity. But he's going to make very difficult.
If we're in that situation of the NDP forming a minority government, we will look at every single opportunity from day one to bring them down at the very first opportunity and get back to the polls.
Whether it's the media or their public exposure, he's going to say this government doesn't have the legitimacy to govern. And until that non-confidence vote happens one way or another, whether it's the budget or otherwise, he's going to make it very difficult. So EB is very much in a difficult, he's in a bind right now. He's going to be squeezed by both sides. It's not an enviable position for someone who's about to assume premier.
So I wonder if there will be an election sooner rather than later, because Sonia is self-interested in winning back her seat. And if she's a part of the negotiation, then perhaps she won't want a deal to last very long.
Well, I mean, look, she expressed during the campaign, both in the leaders' debate and otherwise, that her ideal scenario was that this kind of a result where both parties are within seats of each other, and that whatever the caucus of the Greens ended up being, that they would hold the balance of power. And they've got that.
By electing Greens in this election, we make sure that neither the Conservatives nor the NDP get all of the power. We make sure that we have a legislature that's focused on people and solutions, and we make sure that we have elected people that have to work together. Don't give either of these parties all of the power.
You know, even if they had 5 or 6 seats, they would never be as powerful as they are in this scenario, right? And quite frankly, the Greens' trajectory, both in this campaign and even if they hold another campaign, I don't think it's going to get better than 2 seats, to be perfectly honest with you. So I can't see her triggering that. And even if she was so selfishly directed that she would try to engineer a defeat and go into another campaign, the Green Party would not support it because, again, to hold the balance of power gives them this excessive, or, you know, far outweighs their seat count power in terms of BC politics. So this is as good as it gets for them, regardless of numbers of MLAs they elected. And they're not going to back away from that easily.
What do you think the Conservative Party of BC got right? What issues kind of drove this resurgence? And where do you think that they were weak during the election as well?
I've been around politics for coming on 28 years now, almost, you know, approaching 30 years. And I've never seen a party emerge from literally no seats and a year or a year and a half out being under 10%, maybe even under 5% at one point, to this result. So it's unprecedented. And there's no examples or case history that I can draw on from personal experience to use as a comparison. Look, I think that when you are growing so quickly and you have a BC United that was just collapsing on the vine underneath the terrible leadership of Kevin Falcon, things happen quickly. And so you're nominating candidates because you need a foothold here, or you have someone you think is a community leader here, or you're just looking to get things filled to match the pace of your rise in the polls. But what that does is that leaves you open to vulnerabilities. And as we saw with a guy like Brent Chapman, who got comfortably elected, by the way, but what
in a minority dominant riding.
Exactly. So he got comfortably elected, and clearly it wasn't. But, you know, John said it himself, and I people can paint the BC Conservatives all they want, but I'm a formal federal liberal that abandoned that party because I couldn't take it anymore. And I'm finding now that both federally and provincially, the Conservative Party just aligns with my views as a parent, as a business owner, just as a citizen, single dad trying to make a go of it. We are not extremists. There's a lot of moderates like myself. There are a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds in this party that came together. And so I don't think a guy like Chapman represents the most of us. I mean, some of the stuff he says was really kind of offensive to everybody. And it just doesn't represent the party. And it's unfortunate that he brought so much attention away from what we really had to focus on. In terms of what we did well, I think, look, John is not a flashy leader, but he doesn't have to be. He's a guy that gets the pulse of people. And, whether it's issues like public drug use or cost of living or even SOGI, I think that we hit issues that really resonated with people. I think John was very approachable, has a really good sense of the pulse of where the electorate stands. And that's why I think that we're going to be in an election within 12 months. I really think that's the case. This legislature is not going to last. It's going to be as unproductive as possible. There's not going to be any legislative advancement. The budget, whether they pass the budget, whether it's voted down in a confidence motion, we'll see. But this has a real short shelf life. And my thoughts is that the NDP doesn't have room to grow. They only have room to regress. And the Conservatives have a lot more room to grow because they can replace candidates that were kind of a liability for them. They get more experience. John gets a better sense of what it means to govern a caucus of 45 and be on the verge of government. And I think that we've been well positioned. Win or lose these recounts, we are very well positioned to take government when the next election comes. And so I'm very pleased with how we were positioned. And I thought John did a phenomenal job of leading us into that territory of being viable as a future government or even a current government, depending on how these recounts go.
Fantastic. Well, Jonathan Ross, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. And I'm sure we'll see you again.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.